Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name is Jim Hustwit, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to understand the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, music supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visuals. Jeanie Finlay is a documentary filmmaker. She has made films for HBO and the BBC, including 4 commissions for the acclaimed BBC Storyville strand, such as BIFA-nominated Great Hip Hop Hoax and BIFA-winning Orion, The Man Who Would Be King. She directed the Emmy-nominated Game of Thrones Last Watch, which was behind-the-scenes look at the making of the final series. Her most recent film, Your Fat Friend, is in cinemas now and is a documentary following author and blogger Aubry Gordon, who writes about fat acceptance and anti-fat bias. Jeanie Finlay, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.
So, first question as ever. If we were to rewind to a young Jeanie Finlay, sort of say anywhere between the ages of 8 and 12, gallivanting around the mean streets of Teesside, if someone had asked you, what would you like to be when you grow up? What would you reply?
Well, that's a challenging question. Well, it's not challenging, actually, because I know exactly what the answer is. I thought I was going to end up playing cello on Top of the Pops.
Oh, wow. Specifically on Top of the Pops?
Yeah, because I started playing the cello when I was 7. And I remember when they did this initiative in Teesside schools, that if you went in and they did the Bentley test with you, and if you got a certain, if you scored well, then you were given a free instrument and free lessons. And they said to me, listen, you and 2 other girls have scored the top. You got full marks. Do you want a cello? And I was like, yeah. And I thought it was going to be like this flute. And then they brought out this enormous instrument wrapped in what I perceived as a sleeping bag. And I then proceeded to carry this thing back and forth to school. And I was quite rubbish at doing my practicing, but I had a good ear, so I could sort of just about get away with it. But yeah, I used to watch Top of the Pops and hold my tape recorder up to the television and record the top 10. And at that time, I was seeing, musicians on screen playing live instruments. I was like, yeah, I could do that. I didn't want to be a singer. I wanted to be a cello player on Top of the Pops.
Presumably you would watch Top of the Pops and watch these artists and be so enamoured that you just wanted to be a part of that, or you wanted to be on TV? What was it that...
It wasn't so much about being on TV. I think, pre-Big Brother and pre-reality TV, you could see people having a creative life. It looked fun. It just looked like good fun to be part of a gang, to be in a band. Like, I'm thinking of like Dexy's Midnight Runners or like the Communards. These are all bands that had live music on stage with them, live musicians. And I just sort of thought, oh, that would be quite cool. The other thing I sort of wanted to do was I wanted to be a landscape gardener.
What was why landscape gardener?
It just seemed quite fun. I used to quite like doing gardening.
You get to be outdoors, which I think is very appealing, isn't it?
Well, it's just all creative. I think I've got like an overwhelming urge to make things all the time. And so gardening, I always sort of saw gardening alongside making artwork or playing music was just always a creative act.
And how else did that creativity manifest?
Well, I was very inspired to make things all the time. So I would like making projects, doing paintings. I had a library in the house. Made all of my books into a lending library. I'm just a little nerd who liked doing doing stuff. Coding, learnt how to code quite early.
What, as a child?
Yeah, as like a late teenager. And then like later on when I started making my own work, I learnt how to sort of hand code websites.
Wow.
And it's the secret geek.
Yeah. I think that's what creativity though is, isn't it though? It's like people who are okay being on their own, losing themselves in flow and just doing stuff, and hours pass by before you realise, oh, I should probably eat something. Oh, it's dark outside. That's great. Wow. And was there encouragement from sort of parents and peers to be creative, or was this just a purely self-driven thing?
I'd say it was a combination of self-driven. I mean, my family were bemused by what I was doing. You know, my dad's side of the family is Scottish, and they're in finance and life assurance. And I think, you know, I was a smart kid, so there was a lot of pressure to sort of buckle down and get a proper job, you know, try and train and be a solicitor or a doctor or something like that. But the school I went to a big comprehensive school in Teesside. And one of the things that was sort of really amazing about it at the time was that there was visionary teachers. In particular, the Hewsons, Mr. and Mrs. Hewson, ran the music department, and they took over a defunct building. It had been a house block, and they took it over, and they sort of said, okay, all you people that are getting free instrument lessons, which was like all of us, in order to keep up with your free lessons, you have to be in either the orchestra, the brass band, or the choir, and you have to rehearse every single day. So I was in an absolutely enormous orchestra, like third desk or fourth desk cello. I mean, just to give you an indication of the size, we had like 5 double basses in the orchestra.
That's the kind of thing Hans Zimmer would have. He'd have like 10 double basses.
But I would rehearse every single day, either before school at 8 o'clock or at lunchtime. And, you know, it's a haven for nerds, is you play your music and then you hang out with the music kids. At the same time, we also got a new art teacher, Mr. Middleton. He took over what had always been a bit of a sort of lackadaisical, ropey art department. When I was about 13, 14, he took over and really came in to shake things up and was incredibly ambitious for us kids. So, like, if you get one of those guides of how to do GCSE artwork that still exist, if you look in for one of those editions, you'd see my work, because the teacher invited photographers from Let's Guides and they photographed all our work. And at the end of term, we showed in a proper gallery. I think that those experiences of like showing in a gallery, and also the orchestra, we got into the finals of the National Orchestra Youth Orchestra at the Royal Festival Hall. So I played on stage at the Royal Festival Hall when I was 15, and it just made me think, oh yeah, this could be a thing. This could be a career. This could be okay. Coupled with the fact that the Northern School of Art is the largest independent art college in the country, was in Middlesbrough. It just felt completely plausible that could be a career. Yeah,
which is almost the opposite of what I would have thought of growing up in the Northeast. In my mind, I'd never think of art being encouraged to that level, and even potentially as a career. Because I think certainly for me in Yorkshire, it wasn't. But that's great, and it shows as well the power of good teachers and people who come in and really care that they, you know, this teacher that took over the art department, these teachers that took on a derelict building to pretty much sort of create a Hans Zimmer-esque orchestra. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was really. I don't think you fully appreciate those things at the time, but it definitely sort of showed me that this was possible. And like a lot of kids like myself who were sort of had an artistic bent, it felt completely realistic to go and do a foundation, and to look at art as a possibility. And I really appreciate that. One last thing that I've just popped in my head was, I was part of Cleveland Cello Consort when I was 18, which meant that I was in a group of 18 cellists playing music written for guitar, and then transposed to the cello. And there's something about the sound of 18 cellos playing together in a space it's absolutely incredible. It's amazing. And I totally didn't appreciate it. I was the naughty kid at the back, messing around, smoking, being badly behaved, but then also really there's something about live music being played as a group that's really intoxicating.
Absolutely. And interesting, so did the sort of 18 cellos, did that feel more potent than sort of this huge orchestra that you were in?
Yeah, because you were more exposed, and also the dynamic range of the cello is so broad. So yeah, it's just really good to sort of see people playing the instrument that you're learning at a really, really high level. So all the teachers in the area were the first desks.
Right, okay. Oh, wow, so it was Yeah,
it was adults playing. But it's only in sort of like hindsight that, I look back at that and sort of realise, God, I was so lucky. That was amazing to be doing that at 18.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you still play cello?
I still play a bit. If you watch my film Seahorse and you can hear a cello, that's me.
Ah, amazing.
But I also have the good sense to know that I'm not the greatest cellist in the world. And so it's nice to play.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to play electric cello. I had a residency at a club in London for a year. And so used to play... they had like a chill out garden with live musicians, and I used to play with like a lot of pedals and play live. This like dance night called Return to the Source. It was like a Goa dance evening that had live chill out music. But I'd jam with whatever band was playing that month. I used to go down every month, get the National Express from Nottingham down to the Rocket and just play. I sort of got myself into that because I had the overconfidence of youth to offer myself to a band. Like there was a band called Banco de Gaia, the electronic band, played in Nottingham. I went to see them play, and I asked to go backstage and just sort of said, "Yeah, you need a cellist. It's me."
Amazing. So the confidence. And you mentioned earlier that you had a good ear, which compensated for a lack of practice, which is definitely something I can relate to. Did you get more from sort of improvising and jamming and playing like that than you did from being a part of an orchestra?
When I went to university, I studied at Nottingham Trent. I studied contemporary arts, which you could do you chose 2 of 4 subjects. So you could do dance, performance art, visual art, or music. So my degree's in music and visual art. So I was playing and composing music. When I started playing alone, at first I found it completely terrifying. And then when I learned how to perform, it was just so liberating. So it was I really like learning music and playing it well. But it was exciting. I mean, don't get me wrong, my course was pretty experimental. It was, it was like the like the creative children of John Cage and Judith Weir, Janet Cardiff, and Gavin Bryars, I guess, Steve Reich.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of sort of experimental music, and I did a lot of visual scoring based on photography and stuff like that. So all of that was very exciting, but I did really like learning how to, like really listening to how I performed and learning that. It was very fun, but doing all of those years in the orchestra really taught me how to sight read, and I put in the hours for sure.
And was it, so then obviously, is it at Nottingham Trent that the music and the coding then started to morph into filmmaking?
No, I didn't do it until I left university, like was well out of university. I was making my own, when I left uni, I was writing soundtracks for dance companies and doing visual scoring work, so like live performance work, quite experimental work, and then also my own visual artwork. I mean, developing my work as an artist, I guess, large scale video installation. And then there sort of came a point where I realised that, I wasn't the greatest musician, wasn't the greatest composer, and that's fine. What I really enjoyed was making artwork, making visual ideas. And I did that for quite a while, and I only picked up a camera sort of by accident or instinctively. I was doing a residency for Year of the Artist, where I was photographing older people who were housebound in their houses. So you can do it on any iPhone now, creating a panoramic portrait. But at the time, you could only do it if you very carefully by hand stitched together over 100 sort of 35mm photographs on Photoshop. So I was doing these sort of very intimate portraits, and part of the commission was that they wanted like an interactive work where the older people that I was working with would, participate. They'd get to know how a camera worked or a scanner or whatever, and it couldn't have gone worse. No one was interested. All they wanted to do was have a conversation, tell me about the thimble collections and their wallpaper. And I realised that talking about these things was a way into really understanding people's whole world. So I just started filming them, and because that seemed like it was the work. And it was as instinctive as borrow a camera, learn how to edit, cut them together, made the work, which was called Homemaker, into an interactive documentary online. It went viral in the early days of viral artworks, and after that I made one short film, and I realised that I wanted to make Homemaker, the artwork, into a film with a beginning, a middle and an end, but with teenagers in it. I wanted to tell the story of teenagers that spent almost all of their time in their bedrooms, because it was something that I'd seen when I was in Japan. I was commissioned to remake Homemaker in Japan. I won an award and went out there. And when I went out there, I was commissioned to make Homemaker Tokyo. So very quickly was filming and editing people in their living rooms in Tokyo. And the BBC commissioned me to make a film off the back of my artwork and this 10-minute short. And because I was already an artist, because I knew how I wanted things to look and feel, it meant that I went straight in as a director. And I thought, oh yeah, they're going to commission me to make like a 15-minute film, 20-minute film. And then they said, oh yeah, we want to do this, 60 minutes, off you go. And as soon as I did that, I just sort of thought, oh, well, I'm going to do a feature next. Why not? It felt like I'd found the thing I needed to do. Yeah,
that's incredible. And again, I think what's really nice to hear is it's the passion, the love of doing it, and the doing it off your own bat as well, and enjoying the process. It just led to a very sort of organic, natural momentum, which has led you to where you are. Out of interest, of when you were, I suppose, between the adults and the kids, it's probably a different thing. But what was there an overarching theme of what led to kids spending all their time in their bedroom on their own?
You mean in what I discovered, or why I made the film?
Or what you discovered?
I mean, it's worth saying that the reason why I wanted to make that film was because when I was 12, 13, I was ill and I was off school for a year. And thinking about all these older people who are isolated and what it means to take a big life and put it into a small house was seemed there was a poetry there that I was interested in. And when I was in Japan, I watched this TV program in Japan about hikikomori, which is a phenomenon when young people isolate themselves away, mainly in Japan to play video games. And it made me reflect on the experience that I'd had. So making Teenland was an opportunity for me to reflect deeply on my own experience without having to be in every frame. I mean, every frame in terms of like the decisions made, the people we'd see. And I sort of came to the conclusion that for a lot of young people, I think that your teenage bedroom and the way that you decorate it and the debris of nail varnish and knickers and boy bands is a sort of homemade chrysalis that you need to emerge into adulthood. So the young people I found were on the brink of adulthood and the brink of making that break into being being a grown-up. What does that mean? How does that manifest itself? And will they leave? So that was sort of enough for me to make the film. And it's now like this weird sort of historical document, because one of the girls in the film, Emmy, was really into MySpace and had been like getting married on MySpace and LiveJournal, like married, quote unquote. Yeah, but at the time I've made it sort of purposefully small and intimate because it seemed like the act of placing a camera in front of something is an act of amplification. So the smallest sort of moments and details live very large on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Under the skin. So with Teenland, there's an element of you exploring your own journey when you were younger and you were sort of isolated. Where do you find, what's the driving force behind the creativity? Or is there always an element of you exploring yourself in the films you make, or are there times when it's not? And if not, where what's the starting point? What's the creative impetus, in terms of where you decide to make the film or why you decide to make the film?
Yeah, like as an independent filmmaker, I get to choose what I want to make films about, and then I go out and raise the money and get the access and get broadcasters and people interested. Yeah, often it's sometimes it's just a story that comes to me that I think, oh yeah, I want to explore that. I want to spend some time with that. So, for example, Goth Cruise, the film I made after Teenland, I went to the wedding of a old school friend's sister. And when we'd been at school, she'd been this sort of like Susie Sue Goth that everyone like looked up to, and she was very cool. And when she got married, she was still, had goth tendencies. And it just made me think about goths. Like, you see quite a lot of older goths around, and I wondered, what is it about the subculture of goth? Because I was a goth, but then I stopped being a goth. I flirted with gothdom, but there was a moment where I was just like, oh yeah, I don't want to wear a uniform, and my tastes are much broader than one specific thing. So I'm interested in the idea that people use the way that subcultures help people to express their identity, and what is it about that subculture that's so appealing. So I started to develop a film called Goth Till I Die, and then I came home from work and my husband said, I've got it, the Goth Cruise. And he'd found this cruise ship in America where older goths, mainly corporate goths, would go to Bermuda for a week in the sunshine. And it was just enough to conjure so many questions. Like, do they wear black bikinis? Do people sunbathe? I discovered that goths wear goth block, which is like 50, 60 SPF. And also the setting of a neon lit cruise ship is so incongruous with goth. So Sean in that film says that they stood out like a bruise. But, it enabled me I followed like 5 people on their journey to going on the Goth Cruise. And one of them Sean was a veteran who says that he wears black in the Johnny Cash sense of the word. The world is dark and people need the darkness so they can experience the light. And that's why he wears black. So I sometimes think it's just interesting to follow your nose and find people are interesting and they've got great stories to tell. Don't get me wrong, not every person needs to be filmed or needs to be in a film. So I'm very careful about the people that I actually put in front of my camera. But yeah, I'm still really sort of interested in making films, finding stories. But they all come from a sort of point of curiosity, whether it's just a notion of, oh, this would be interesting, or I've read something in the newspaper, or I was kicking an idea around for a bit and then I found the right person. But I put the same sort of energy and heart into everything I make, whether I initiate it or like when HBO approached me to make The Last Watch and be embedded on the final season of Game of Thrones. Just because they asked me to do it, it's like I can't phone it in. So they let me make a real film, which was great.
And were you a fan of Game of Thrones?
Honestly?
Yeah.
I'd not watched it.
Right, okay.
I had an initial phone call with some of the producers that were sort of looking for a documentary maker, and I'd got a heads up from a producer in Ireland. He'd said, you're going to get a call tomorrow, so take the call. And then I got the email through and it was from HBO, and there was no inkling of what it was about at all. And so then I Googled the people, and on their IMDb, all their credits were Game of Thrones. I was like, shit, I've not watched the show. I'd watched one episode and was just like, anything that needs a map to get into it, it's too much.
And index at the back of the book of all the characters because it's so complicated.
Exactly. It's just like, this is quite a lot to be going on with. However, I do understand fandom, and I understand how people, like with the goth, how people use music or TV or pop culture to tell the story of their lives. So I just talked to them about how I would approach it as a film. I also sat my friend down, who's a massive Game of Thrones fan, and said, why do you love it? What's good about it? What do you get from it? And she sort of said, no one's safe, anyone can die, and everyone knows that winter is coming. So I was like, okay, cool. I get that. I'm interested in its place in the shape of pop culture. And then I got a phone call a couple of weeks later saying, can you come to Los Angeles on Tuesday and meet the showrunners and the execs? So, where are you? We'll send a car.
Nottingham, England.
Nottingham. So I got out there and just pitched it how I'd like to make the film. And then I think I was filming within something like 6 weeks.
And in that conversation, when you explained how you would approach it, what did you say?
I did quite a simple pitch. I basically just said, Game of Thrones is about 7 families looking for the Iron Throne. There's 5,000 crew members on set for Game of Thrones. It's in its final season. Give me 4 months to just wander around set and listen and look and find people, and I will find you 7 amazing characters from 7 different departments, and we'll follow them for the final year to see if they make it. I'd made a film called Panto, embedded, following the lowest budget pantomime in Nottingham a couple of years before. And we just shot the hell out of it and just followed what was going on. Amazing people, tears and laughter, and also just there was like a real struggle. They were really like trying to do their best with no money. And so I just sort of thought, I'm going to remake Panto, but on the set of the largest television show in the world.
Okay, yeah. I imagine that even, in spite of the fact that one of them's low-budget Panto in Nottingham and the other one's one of the biggest shows in the world, I would imagine there was a lot of similarities between the people and the characters between those 2 shows.
I would say that everything on Game of Thrones was amplified because there's so much stuff and money and weather. So much stuff was done outdoors, and there was the weight of expectation. But narratively, a lot of things were really similar, and I just sort of kept that in mind. I mean, it's worth saying on Game of Thrones, The Last Watch, we shot 900 hours of observational material. So it was one hell of a job to pull it together. And then, bringing in a composer, like bringing in Hannah Peel to write the soundtrack really early on, was also great. And like behind me, these things here are the hand-woven tapestries that were the opening credits of the film. It was just good fun to like play and do things. Often being a director, or I'm always a director producer on my films. It means that I get to spend the money in the ways that I think are important or interesting, and I try and allocate a good chunk of the budget to creatively playing, so there's still room to try stuff out.
And interesting that you mentioned Hannah, who did the music. Obviously, I always think, and this is why I'm keen to talk to directors on this podcast, because I always feel that there are quite a lot of people involved in the music for any film or game or ad that goes beyond just the composer, because it's very much a collaboration. And I think, obviously, with your musical background, I would imagine that you have probably quite early on some interesting ideas about where you want to go. With the Game of Thrones, you said you brought in Hannah quite early. What was it that drew you to Hannah, and what were those initial conversations?
I'm a fan. I think Hannah's really a skillful and brilliant musician. I worked with the Magnetic North, which was Hannah's band, on the Great Hip Hop Hoax. Their album, is it called The Bay of Scale? Or I can't remember what the album was called, but I got a pre-release copy of the album when we were cutting The Great Hip Hop Hoax, which is a film set in Scotland about two chancers that become one of the biggest rap acts to kick up dust in London, got a massive recording deal with Sony, and what no one realises is that they're just two students from Dundee who never even set foot on American soil. So part of the funding for that film was Scottish Screen, so we had to spend money on music in Scotland. And we did a combination of score. My brother wrote quite a bit of the score for that film, and Fife Ewing, who used to be in Therapy, was the drummer in Therapy. They worked together to make the score, this sort of hip hop inspired and electronic score. But I also wanted to clear quite a lot of music, and I worked very closely with Graham Langley, who's a brilliant music supervisor. Anyway, he got me a copy of The Magnetic North. I really like Erased Tapes as the label. I listened to the track, and I used to just play CDs in my car all the time. And I heard this Bay of Scale track and I was just blown away. It was amazing, by The Magnetic North. And we built the whole ending of the film as one of the first things we cut, using that track. And then when I came to make Orion, The Man Who Would Be King, I contacted The Magnetic North again, and I used some more of their tracks. Often I get like the instrumental, but then also the track with the vocals. We lay them on the we lay both of them on the soundtrack, and we'll dip the vocals in and out to allow for dialogue to come in and out, and usually cut it up quite a bit. And they were sort of very up for that, and we kept in touch. They came to screenings, great people. And for a while I was going to make a film with them, but then plans didn't work out. But as soon as we started making Game of Thrones, I was like, yes, this is the time to work with Hannah. She'll be great. And I just got her in early, like maybe in the first couple months of production. Like I knew we were going to shoot for like 14 months maybe. But I wanted her on set to listen and see, like, what does this look like? Because there was such a sort of overwhelming intenseness to being on set on these gigantic sets with 500 extras all dressed up, and they did so much stuff in camera that, there's fire everywhere or there's a castle. They'd build these enormous sort of 360 degree sets that were truly works of art. So I wanted her to feel it and get to know it. And I think that music in a film, or music in the films that I make, is like another character. The sound has got to be another character informing the narrative and the storytelling. So you would never just slap it on at the end or work with temp. I don't want to work with temp. What a waste of time. And it's also like the funders always fall in love with the temp, which you can then never clear. So why not build the soundtrack in the same way that you build the edit? So it's more work in some ways for the composers. Like I'm sure it's a pain in the arse, because we'll just keep cutting and keep iterating stuff. So it means that the tracks will go through maybe 20, 25 iterations, and then it gets recorded live. But with Game of Thrones The Last Watch, my brief to Hannah was, let's score the weather. Let's score these places, because the weather in Northern Ireland is so brutal, and there's a storm in the film, The Beast from the East. So I took her to a lot of the locations, and we scored music for them. And then that moves and changes, and it gets moved around the film. It might be, you know, she scored something for Winterfell and we end up using that in, I don't know, you know, it could end up being someone's theme that you use. But it's a really good place to start, and it's good to just have sounds to start playing with rather than, I don't want to talk about it too much. I want to feel it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ultimately music is about eliciting emotion, isn't it? And the best way to do that is to let the music do the talking. And it's interesting hearing what you say about not using temp, because there's as a composer, I think there's pros and cons, but certainly, as you mentioned, that one of the big cons is that people get married to the temp. And so ultimately, as a composer, you are then trying to recreate the temp as closely as possible in a way that you won't get sued because it sounds too much like the original piece. And it then removes the creative element from it. But to actually approach the music as you would the edit. And yeah, as you say, 20 iterations of the same piece of music. Incidentally, so would Hannah be doing 20 iterations of that same piece of music, or would you sort of cut it up in the edit?
We do a bit of both, so we might cut it up and then send it over to her and sort of say, we need this moment to happen with this action. So we might loop stuff. So you've got a longer intro. But often it'll be like, it's too much here, or can you strip it down? And sometimes she would give us stems that were, you know, so we would sort of mix the balance of stuff and then send cuts back to her and just say, look, this is how it's working. What do you think? So it's a very sort of back and forth sort of conversation. But I want it to feel, I want to learn stuff on all my new film. Every film I make, I want to learn stuff. I want to push myself. And I don't know what the experience is like to be a composer on the receiving end of that, but I also want them to push themselves as well. I don't want them to just phone in the stuff they always do. I want them to really look at this as a creative conundrum and how do we fix it? So often the feedback I give is like a question rather than prescriptive. It's like you describe the symptoms, you don't tell people the answer you want.
The cure, what you think,
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do. But, you know, obviously having a experience of writing and playing music, I think that's been helpful in having those conversations or being at a mix or, being at like a live record or at the mix for the film. I'm never at the mix for the music, but I'm always at the mix for the film.
Yeah, and I think what you say about, I think any creative really wants to be pushing themselves and getting outside of their comfort zone. So allowing a composer to do that, it sounds like you enjoyed that exploration for them as much as they would enjoy it, and hopefully you're doing the same. And as you say, a collaboration, I think certainly in the past I've been very guilty of thinking, you know, when it comes to providing a piece of music, is like I've got to deliver the final product, but actually it is much more of a collaboration. And this was something Stephen Warbeck was one of the first people I interviewed on the podcast, and he talked about that. And it's very much a conversation backwards and forwards, and that's the organic way to allow the score to develop, to work in kind of synergy with the visuals.
I do think it's hard. I think it's hard for people to show stuff.
Yeah.
That is, you know, we have to have there's a lot of trust has to be there, because I'm not going to freak out and go, oh my God, it's terrible. Because I know they can do it. And it's going to be great. And you have to go through lots of sort of iterations. I just sort of feel like perfectionism is like the enemy of creativity. You have to be open to the process and show your sort of tender belly to it.
Well, that's it. And as you say, with any artwork, when you put it on display, you have to be vulnerable. But what's quite interesting is that from a young age, it feels like you were quite comfortable with exposing yourself and being vulnerable and putting your artwork out there. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I guess from a young age, it was just what you did. I learned how to do it quite young. The thing that took time to learn how to do was to step out on my own. Because all of those times that I did it before, I was always part of a really big group. So the first time I performed live on my degree as a single cellist, I was so nervous. I got them to make a screen and I was like a sort of silhouette.
Okay, that's a nice way around it.
Because I didn't want to do it. It was too scary.
Yeah. But in terms of you never had that fear in terms of putting your work out there, putting out those early sort of photographic exhibitions or then subsequently the short films?
No, it's just sort of, I think there's a value in being finished and getting stuff done. You know, one of the things that I sort of think about, I think my husband's a filmmaker, and he often teaches, and he sort of tries to say to people, it's better to be 95% happy with what you've made and 100% finished than the other way round. You know, I know all these geniuses who got stuff stuck in their bedroom. It's never out in the world. Because the thing is, you learn so much about what happens when your work meets an audience. You know, and I watched some of my older films, and are there things I would change? Sure, but I sort of look at them with the tenderness that I might look at the teenage version of myself. They were just learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a snapshot in time of what you could do at that given moment, and it was and it's interesting. I was going to say, and it's perfect as it is. It wasn't perfect, but it was excellent. It was because the pursuit of, and I think always, like you say, with creativity, pursuit of perfection is an amazing way to stifle creativity, because you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to create something that ultimately doesn't exist. And there was I always quote it as been Tony Robbins, but I don't think it is Tony Robbins because I can't find who to attribute the quote to. But right for the bin, particularly with music, it's just in the early stages of creativity, just allow something to happen and be okay with throwing it away at the end of the day, because that just allows you to be playful and curious with the process in a way that you wouldn't if you were kind of putting a lot of pressure on yourself to create a masterpiece, which, you know, I think when I started out was very, very guilty of. You mentioned on each project you want to push yourself and learn something new and kind of get out your comfort zone. So with Your Fat Friend, which is on release at the moment, what were the learnings from that? How did you push yourself and how did you get out of your comfort zone on that?
It was a whole lot of stuff. I made the film over 6 years. I started the film before making Seahorse and my Game of Thrones film. So I started Your Fat Friend. Then these commissions sort of happened for Seahorse and Game of Thrones. I then came to pick Your Fat Friend back up with real intensity, and we were hit by a global pandemic. So I don't know, I had to be really tenacious, had to throw away everything I thought I was going to do and just really lean into what was happening. When I first started filming Aubry Gordon, so the film's about Aubry Gordon, who's she describes herself as a fat lady about town, writing about her experiences of what it's like to be a very fat woman in the world, and about the bias she receives, but also her hopes for her body and for a future where people are encountered with more tenderness, I guess. And she writes with candour and amazing humour. She's very charismatic and a good person to spend time with. I initially thought that she would just be one person in a film I was making about fatness. I was sort of kicking the tyres on this project, trying to work out what was the shape it was going to take. And when I met Aubry and I met her family, I just sort of thought, here is this charisma bomb of a woman, And here's a family who are unable to even say the word fat out loud. And the gap between them and her becoming visible to them is where I can make my film. And so just allowing myself to really look at what's going on here and to pivot and to change direction and lean into the stuff that was good felt like a leap of faith, but also like the only way to make the film work, really. In terms of sound on that film, I worked with composer Tara Krem, who I also worked with on Seahorse. And she's someone that I met at university. She was the first person I said hello to at my first day at university. We used to play. I wrote a piece of music for two cellos and accordion, which she played on years ago. But she's an absolutely brilliant composer, brilliant creative thinker. And I just thought she'd be the perfect person to sort of really get under the skin of this story in one woman's sort of expression. And yeah, we similarly brought Tara in from the word go, didn't work with temp, built the soundtrack as we were building the edit, and and then recorded the soundtrack at Rack Studios, and this time worked with, it was a bigger commission for Tara, put more money into the budget for music, so it meant that we could bring in like cellists who were really brilliant. And it was a real joy to see it being, I found it one of the most moving experiences of my life was to sit in the studio and hear people playing the soundtrack that we'd been cutting to for so long. To hear it performed live was incredible. It was so good.
It's so nice to hear that's a powerful experience for you as well, because I think as a composer, when you take it out of the box and you do have a number of musicians, there's a moment of fear. It's like, oh, I hope this sounds as good when it's played live as it does with my mock-ups, but when it does, it's those musicians are bringing it to life, and it's so lovely to hear that you're feeling that, and it's because it's bringing your film to life as well. And it's a magical moment. Sorry, I got goosebumps when you said that, and I completely lost my train of thought. There was another question.
Well, it's amazing. There's this really complex piano piece in the film, and you could do it in post. You could have the left hand and then the right hand, and then just mix them together. And the musician that Tara found, the pianist, just said, it's fine, I can do it. And I think that each hand was a beat out. So they were playing the same thing, but a beat out. And she played it double-handed. It took her 3 goes and then she got it. It was astonishing. And part of me was like, we can just do it. We can do it in the mix. And then actually seeing her get it was like I like creating visuals that are done in camera. They're created in camera in that moment. And hearing the music captured in the same way was really just felt like the right fit. Yeah.
Because there's that the magic in that performance is something that you can't recreate in the mix. It's a magic that happens in the moment, and that in terms of a good producer is somebody who manages to capture the magical performance and the great take, because it's very hard to, I think I would argue maybe impossible to fake. But yeah.
There was an amazing sound team on the film, and I think we had a all-female sound team across everything. We only let some men into play some of the instruments, I think. So, Tara's the composer, Olga Fitzroy was the engineer, Daisy Cool was the person looking after I don't know what she was doing actually, the pagination of it, maybe. And then Pip Norton was the re-recording mixer, and Anna Sully was what was she? She was the mixer. She was the sound designer. And one of the things about being a producer is that I can bring in whomever I want in. And I'm always conscious of the fact that composers for film are female composers, and female and marginalised gender is still like only 4% of the picture. So, yeah, so I always make sure that I interview female composers for the job, and then I give the job to the best person for the job, for best person to fit the project. And on the last few films, that's always been women.
Well, great. I mean, it's always notable whenever you go to a kind of music producer meetup or a composer meetup. I mean, women are so scarcely represented. I think the Music Producers Guild are quite good at it, and because I think Olga's part of the Music Producers Guild. I think she's on the, or used to be, chair. But yeah, so that's great. So you had the sort of the dream team of
amazing. Yeah, amazing. And seeing Olga steer the sessions was quite something. And then we took that from, like, we recorded at RAC, and we recorded, I can't remember what it's called, it's like a recording studio on a boat. And then we mixed at Air, which is like my dream place to mix. I love mixing. I think I've mixed almost all of my films at Air, apart from, we did do Pinewood for Seahorse. Yeah.
Fascinating how, I mean, the level of investment that you have in the music is incredible. I think for some directors, music can be a bit of an afterthought because they're so kind of visually led, but it really feels like there's an integration of music and visuals from the get-go with you, which is, it's inspiring. I
think it's essential. Well, for me it is. And similarly, like poor old Graham Langley, who is my music supervisor, I sometimes think when he sees my name pop up on his phone, he must just go, oh God, what does she want now? But he has secured me some amazing music over the years. Like the end credits of Seahorse are a Bowie track. And we had like next to nothing. I wrote a letter, and the Bowie estate gave us the track Hoax, because it was really important to Freddie McConnell, the trans guy who had the baby. And similarly on Orion, there was loads of difficult clearances to do because we were sailing close to the Elvis estate. That was very challenging. And then on Game of Thrones, I wanted some quite left field picks for the soundtrack because they were narratively driven, like Could It Be Magic by Barry Manilow. And getting to secure that music was great. And in that film, you hear a cover version of This Corrosion by the Sisters of Mercy by Lamb Chop. And we tried to clear This Corrosion for Goth Cruise, and at the time Andrew Eldritch wasn't clearing music. So I was able later on in my career to sneak that song in.
Okay, nice. You finally got the one that got away. You got it back.
Yeah.
Getting a taste. It's probably a good point to kind of start getting a taste for the music that inspired you. You've met, I mean, there's quite a few bands and artists that you've mentioned, but when you think back to your formative years, and obviously you were sharing off mic beforehand that you used to DJ, are there some kind of seminal albums, artists that just blew your mind at the time and have gone some way to informing your creative process now?
Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in music. I used to spend an inordinate amount of money in Alan Fernley's record shop in Middlesbrough. But I was into, like as a teenager, me and my best friend Kate Orton used to steal her older brother's records. And so the bands that really sort of formed a foundation for me were bands like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, David Bowie, The Smiths, I guess. Morrissey is, he's a problematic guy these days, but hearing those songs about small moments sang with a regional accent by a guy that was sort of an unconventional heartthrob, talking about the sort of bitter, difficult, sweet joy of being a person, was just so enticing. It was amazing. I think bands like the Smiths, for sure, definitely. And then later on, going to see bands like Jane's Addiction, Prince. Prince was everything. Went to see Prince a few times. I've probably seen Belle and Sebastian more than any other band I've ever seen. And I'm a lifelong Dolly Parton enthusiast. I've met her, and we tried to make a film about Dolly Parton quite a while, and it just didn't happen. But we went out to Dollywood and filmed at Dollywood, which was very strange and wonderful. But I've been a fan of hers for like a long time, and I like her because she knows who she is. I think she's incredibly skilled, massively underrated as a musician. I think it's only when Dolly's gone that people will go, hey, she was actually really talented. She wasn't just a shrewd business lady. I think she's sort of dismissed as this sort of pop culture. I know she's beloved now as sort of a pop culture icon, and a good person, but her music's really, really accomplished and brilliant. Songs like Bargain Store or The Bridge, Down from Dover, they're just incredible. They're really, the storytelling and the passion and just the musicality of them are incredible.
In the same way that you had, Dolly Parton, you were obviously very drawn to her. Are there specific films that you maybe saw when you were younger, which maybe not necessarily informed the choice to go into filmmaking, but made you sort of stop? And I'm interested as well, actually, because obviously you've gone into documentary filmmaking, and it's always very much about examining the humanity of the people that you're looking at. Were you exposed to that at a younger age, and did something happen there, or was that just a more organic process? And what films, what did you consume when you were younger that you feel like have fed into what you do now?
Oh, that's a challenging question. I mean, I think that music and film for me was always something that felt like a window to somewhere different. So I used to go to the cinema quite a lot. There was an art house cinema in Stockton-on-Tees where it had a really uncomfortable raked seating, and you could go and see whatever. It was all independent releases, and it was pretty esoteric kind of choices. And it was less the individual films and more the idea that film existed out there as a sort of opening a door to the big world that felt really exciting. And when I came to Nottingham, I came to Broadway Cinema, where I'm sat right now, in my first week. And then I started working behind the bar. And I've been based here in the cinema for a long time. Glimmer Films, my production company, is based here. But I show my rough cuts in the cinema. And I would say that there's two filmmakers that have had sort of more influence on me in recent years than anyone else. And they are Hirokazu Koreeda, the Japanese filmmaker, who I think that their film Afterlife is one of the things that made me think about becoming a documentary filmmaker. They tell stories of tenderness and life, small stories writ large on a big screen. And what Correada does is release emotion over the length of a film. So you didn't notice, but he's put his hand in your heart, and they're very overwhelming, sort of visceral experiences. And he started off as a documentary maker before moving into fiction, and I just think his films are masterpieces. Shoplifters, Like Father, Like Son. Just incredible. And then in recent years, I really love the cinema of Céline Sciamma, the French director. There's a film that they made a couple of years ago called Petit Maman. And it's about... it's a film that I thought a lot about when I was making Your Fat Friend. It's about a woman whose mother has died, and she goes back to the house that her mother had to clear it out, and she goes for a walk in the woods, and when she goes for a walk she becomes a child and she meets another girl in the woods, and it's her mum. So it's about holding tenderness for the child you once were and the child that your parent also was. And Your Fat Friend is a film about parenting, and it's a film I wanted to make because it's the film that I wish that I could have seen when I was 13, 14, 15. And it's a film about Aubrey's parents seeing her, because I think everyone wants to be seen by the people that they hold close to them. And this idea of sort of finding emotion in the work that you make without being saccharine, I think is like the holy grail. This is what I'm always looking for. And often that comes by looking closer and listening, but also just giving time to the small moments. That's how I think that the small details of people's lives can be incredibly moving, and they're often the things that aren't given space on screen. You know, we live in a time where streamers are very dominant, and the stories that we're being told all look the same because the streamers have got a list of cameras that you're allowed to use and a list of editors that they'd like you to edit with. And so I want to make work that needs to be told in the way that it's being told, if you see what I mean, rather than to a prescriptive set of rules that are set up by someone else before you've even started exploring the film you want to make.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose with social media, there's very much a movement of everyone presenting the best possible self. Whereas actually, as a documentary filmmaker, you're getting deep into what moves this person, what informs how they are, and it's not necessarily the best possible self. It's the whole package. It's the good and the bad, and you're looking at their internal world as well, which is, I think, what resonates with people, because people see themselves in that and see what it is to be human and relate to it. And I think if you're moved and you can relate to something, then you very much have someone's attention. So, and it's maybe a counter movement to the way people exist, on social media. But yeah. Well, that's amazing, Jean. I think I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to probably keep chatting for the next hour, but we're probably better.
Yeah, don't start me. I was about to tell you about when I went to the Criterion Closet, but that was...
No, do it. Tell us about the Criterion Closet.
That was like Sophie's Choice. Last year when we premiered Your Fat Friend at Tribeca, and while I was there, I got invited to go to the closet. Oh my God, it's like heaven for nerds. I had so 4 of my films were featured in a Criterion collection called People Person, the documentaries of Jeanie Finlay, which is a total honour because I love Criterion. They're so amazing. Anyway, you go to the offices, and it's an enormous office, and all the walls are lined with the alternative art that they've created for all of the special DVDs and the Blu-rays that they make. Anyway, you get led to a tiny closet, and in that closet is every single release that Criterion have ever put out on DVD or Blu-ray. And you go in and you're allowed to take whatever you want. And then they take a photo of you and it goes on the wall. So it's overwhelming for two reasons. So you go in and so you're just like, have you got All About Eve? And they look on the chart and they go, yep, it's up here. Have you got The Lady Eve by Preston Sturges? Yes, it's right here. Have you got Rushmore? Yes. Have you got, and then, the first film I picked was Afterlife by Corrieda. Then I got the Petit Maman box set. And so it was like, it's like doing Desert Island Discs, but with films. And then they give you a bag and you take them away. But then what they do, because they've taken a Polaroid of you, they take 2 Polaroids, one for you to take home, and then you go into the kitchen and the whole wall is covered in Polaroids of the directors that have been in there before, and you pin your photo as the most recent picture. So there's Agnes Varda, there's John Waters, there's Isabella Rossellini. And so it felt in that moment that I was becoming a little stop in film. It felt really sort of significant and like, oh my God, look at this, Mum.
You've been immortalised on the wall of Criterion along with all these other people that you love and respect.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a moment. And then you go home and you've got this like stack of Blu-rays that I just didn't think about it. It was just all instinct. Have you got this? Have you got this? Yeah. It was amazing.
Amazing. It's like a child in a sweet shop.
Yeah.
So to finish up,
yes.
These are the important questions. What's your favourite? What's your favourite biscuit?
What's my favourite biscuit? Oh, a Tunnock's caramel wafer.
Oh, nice. I thought you were going to go tea cake, but you jinxed at the last moment when
caramel wafer's the way forward.
Caramel wafer, nice.
So good.
What's a little known fact about you?
That I'm hypermobile. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and so all of my joints are hypermobile.
Oh, really?
And the thing that no one can see is like everything bends.
Your thumb's touching your forearm.
Yeah.
Wow. So could you potentially be a contortionist?
In the olden days, the contortionists were all people who had EDS.
Right. Okay. Next question. What scares you?
Hair.
Hair?
I've got a fear of hair when it's left the body.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So in
when
a plug
I was
hole.
filming like a plug hole, my worst nightmare. But also like a single hair on a desk in a hotel.
Well, they haven't cleaned it well enough if there's a hair left behind, have they?
Oh. But also, like, I was filming on the hair truck a lot on Game of Thrones, and I found it really scary.
Would a wig freak you out then?
Wig's fine.
Wig's fine. So when it's all together, it's just...
Yeah, it's hair that when it's left the body just is... It's not cool. Like a stray hair on someone's arm.
Amazing. And finally, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Don't sweat the big stuff, sweat the small stuff.
Can you expand on that a bit? What small stuff?
I just mean, like, with film, trust your gut, and the small details are the things that are important.
Okay. Interesting. And I am conscious as well that some people that listen to this podcast are maybe sort of starting out on a journey of filmmaking or music or whatever. Have you got any sort of nuggets of advice for anyone who is starting out who wants to have a career in filmmaking?
Yeah, story and intimacy trump gear and kit any day of the week. And also, sell one of your lenses and buy a microphone. Everyone will forgive bad imagery in a film, but no one will forgive bad sound.
Wow. Amazing. Excellent advice. Well, Jeanie, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, if anybody wants to find you, where do you hang out on Tinterweb?
I'm mainly on Instagram these days. I occasionally go on Twitter, but it's like a hellscape on there at the moment. But yeah, I'm easy to find. I'm just at Jeanie Finlay. That's one N, and yeah, at Jeanie Finlay. I'm easy to find.
Yeah, and it's jeaniefinlay.com for your website, where there's a number of your films are available on Vimeo on demand.
Yes, that's right.
So yeah, awesome. And just quickly, what's next? What are you working on?
Well, I'd have to kill you if I was to tell you. No, but I'm 2 years into a new film.
Amazing. Okay, so watch this space. If it's anything like Your Fat Friend, it could be another 6 years before that comes out. But
it could be. Yeah. I mean,
notwithstanding a global pandemic in the middle, obviously that's hopefully we've done that. We've been there, done that.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, but Jeanie, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been great to chat to you.
Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larkmusic.com. Larkmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larkmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.